Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your host, David Fox. With me is the well-researched, everything. I immediately ran out of adjectives. I'm sorry. UberHansen. We are coming to you once again pre-recorded because once again I cannot have my schedule work for me to do these shows live. At some point, we'll get back to a normal schedule, but it will not be this week, and it probably won't be next week either. But at some point, we will be back live with all of you, and I'm sure you will all appreciate that, or at least I hope you do. But as for now, the last time we all gathered together as a podcasting family, we talked about the coaching cycle of the AFC. We planned on doing the entire NFL. Unfortunately, very unlike me, I was very long-winded, so we didn't get through it. We will get through the NFC tonight. So we'll also go over some Bills news that has happened between our last show and this show. Obviously, a bunch of other shows with Cover One and a bunch of other people have already talked about a lot of those moves. We'll just sort of dip our toes into it a little bit, give our 2 cents, and then we'll jump right into the rest of it. But before we do all of that, first of all, Ooper, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I feel like it's that time of the year where people are just sick constantly, and I feel like I'm in that stretch. Last week was pretty rough. Then I was healthy, and now I'm starting to feel like another cold coming on.
Yeah.
But that won't bother me tonight. That'll bother me tomorrow.
There you go. Power through. See, it all works out in the end. It was meant to happen today and tonight.
Mhm.
So before we get into the meat of the show, we of course have to take care of some business. And the first bit of business is our lovely friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Folks, if you are sad that this season has ended, I am with you, especially given the way that this season has ended. But don't worry about it because you got to get ready for all the other stuff that Underdog Fantasy has in store for you. You can still go to their website. You can still do all sorts of different things on there. If you use the promo code COVER1 when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is a free $100 just for you and you only. If you sign up using the promo code COVER1, sign up today and start winning today. In addition to all of that, we also have our wonderful friends who are here and supporting us every week. And that is those of you who subscribe and are One Pass supporters. To tell you more about that, here are Greg and Aaron from the Cover One flagship show.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
Thank you to Greg and Aaron for doing an immaculate read on this on this advertisement that they always do every week. So we're just gonna jump right into it. This will be a long podcast. It just will be. I'll try not to bloat it out so much, but it's gonna be long. It just is. First things first, we're gonna sort of round up a little bit of news from the Bills from the last couple of weeks. So first thing, Ronald Curry hired as the Bills quarterbacks coach. He was most recently in New Orleans. There is a connection, obviously, between Joe Brady and the Saints and his time there spent with Sean Payton, Ronald Curry, along with a lot of those Sean Payton Saints staffers, has been there for a long time, has a lot of experience under his belt, and obviously a connection with Joe Brady. Any thoughts on Ronald Curry?
Yeah, I mean, so when it happened, tweeted this out. His versatility is the thing that stands out to me, right? Like he's been a wide receivers coach, he's been a quarterbacks coach, he's been an offensive assistant, he's been a pass game coordinator. I think that all of those skill sets, all like his hands in all those cookie jars, is going to be beneficial for the Bills. And I'm interested to see if bringing him in to this team is going to kind of help maybe bring back a little bit of Stephon Diggs, maybe even unlock Khalil Shakir more, and then in theory, even put Dawson Knox or Dalton Kincaid in more proper positions. I think he's an experienced NFL wide receiver, granted not the best career. A lot of that is owed to the awful quarterbacks he was given his entire career, but just a lot of different parts and abilities that Ronald Curry has. So I'm definitely intrigued by it. It could be a great signing because he's a name that seemingly has kind of started ringing the past couple of years in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he was one of these coordinators down at the Senior Bowl. That they don't just like give those out to anybody. Like they're people who they like know can actually run practices well, can pay attention to certain details, and actually coach up these guys in a short amount of time. So that does speak to sort of his ability and how the rest of the league views him. And a lot of these Sean Payton guys, all if nothing else, have attention to details and know the game really well. And even if they aren't necessarily the best on their own, right? Like Joe Lombardi, right, had multiple stints as an offensive coordinator with the Lions and the Chargers. Neither of them really worked out. Pete Carmichael with the Saints this past year didn't really work. But at the end of the day, like those guys still have a ton of knowledge. They know what they're doing. It's just that they're kind of not in a position or have the best ability to be play callers and be in charge of the whole operation on one side of the ball, and that's fine. There's not a lot of guys that are. There's seemingly just fewer and fewer at times. But bringing in somebody like Curry as a quarterback coach, especially like you talked about with his versatility as a former receivers coach and a quarterback coach, we saw sort of the connection between Diggs and Allen, and really Diggs and some more than just one of his receivers, right? I mean, it was Diggs, it was kind of Davis off and on. Like it kind of just it was inconsistent throughout the year. And with Diggs, it was especially down the stretch and especially on big plays, right? There was just a whole missing element to this offense of just connecting on big plays. So I think some of that probably has to do with timing. Some of that has to do with placement. Some of that has to do with just not being on the same page. So I think that bringing in somebody who has that sort of experience will be able to kind of just meld things a little bit better together, especially given his experience with Brady, with Saints. I think that this is a very natural, easy connection to make. Moving on to John Butler, longtime coach for this team, who coached defensive backs, corners, is now out. He was also the passing game coordinator last year, I believe. This was a pretty big deal when it happened. And based on how quickly he went to Twitter to complain about his departure, it seems like this was not as mutual as the Bills kind of framed it as. So, and that's understandable, for somebody who has obviously done a very good job during his time with the Bills. It's difficult when you're told, yeah, no, not anymore. We're bringing in someone else. And we will talk about one of the people that they did bring in a little bit. But John Butler's been great for this team. It's not surprising that he's a little bit upset and maybe bitter about the way in which this happened, and especially given all the different problems that they've had at DB with injuries and whatnot, and struggling guys like particularly Kaiir Elam, right? I mean, Kaiir Elam was a big struggle, and part of that was just him being a very different type of player than they would normally get. But regardless, I mean, him leaving is a big deal and kind of seems to be signaling that the Bobby Babich defense is going to be shifting towards something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, there's no discounting what John Butler did, right? Like, you have all these defensive backs for the Bills, whether it's Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer or Trey White or even Christian Benford now, Levi Wallace, like the list goes on and on of players that seemingly played above their level, right? Or came to Buffalo and were presumed to be a certain type of player and then got to this team and elevated. So John Butler's owed a massive amount of those outcomes. But at the same time, I think you're right. Like, this kind of signals to me we're going to see a little bit different defense. We're going to probably see a little more aggressive defense is what I would presume. And it also kind of makes me wonder what is going to be the move at safety for the Bills, right? Like, I think we all know we have the corners on the roster. There's questions around Trey White, so be it. But Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford, you could slot those in, and I'm happy with the Bills' corners. The questions at safety, and now with John Butler out and Bobby Babbitt kind of calling this defense, I'm wondering if we're going to see a little bit different than what we've seen, historically from the Bills safeties with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's clearly going to be a lot of changes, even if they aren't like dramatic changes. Like, they're not really going to change. At least I don't think that they're going to be changing like the fact that they're a very nickel heavy defense.
Yeah.
Maybe they go from 90, whatever the percentage was. I'm sure it was in the 90s. Because I think it's been in the 90s for the last like 4 or 5 years. But maybe that shifts from like 90 something to like mid to low 80s or something like that, which would still be pretty high. But I think that might help counter like their deficiencies in the run game to an extent. Even though Taron Johnson is a very good run defender, how you have to fit a nickel defender versus how you fit just a regular stand-up linebacker, blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts of intricate details that go into all of that, and I'm sure that's been talked about with Eric. And if you want to hear more of that, go tell them. Like, they would probably love to talk about that in a film room. We got a whole offseason to discuss stuff like this. So, but yeah, I think having Butler out, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, like on the nickel topic too, we probably won't go too far into this, but like the Bills literally hired, his name's Scott Booker. He's a nickel coach. Like, that's his job. So that was something that was interesting to me because that's the evolution of the NFL, right? Like, nickel is the new base, but I think you're right in that historically with the Bills, ever since Taron Johnson's became Taron Johnson, it's been like 98% nickel or 98% nickel plus, let's say, right? They throw in dime, but Taron Johnson's still on the field as the nickel. Maybe in this upcoming season, we see more base from the Bills, which would be a massive change to this defense, even if it's 10% less than what we currently have.
For sure. And going off of that, because they've had a nickel coach before in Jim Salgado, and they got rid of him last year. He ended up going to Michigan State. Definitely doesn't regret that, I'm sure. But I think that it's interesting that they got rid of Salgado because he had been there for a while, and then they just don't have a nickel coach during 2023, and then they bring in this other guy. It's interesting, and I think some of that is probably just giving Babich a little more support, having more guys around him in his first year, being so young and all that, blah blah blah. Totally fine, right? That all makes sense. So, but another interesting addition was Jahmile Addae as the cornerbacks coach, because he comes from the University of Miami, and he is a big, like, man corner type of guy, right? Which kind of signals that the Bills really do still believe in Kaiir Elam, and they want him to succeed, which is fine. That's fine, right? But it also means that, like, they might also still really believe in Trey White, because when Trey White, I said this during the salary cap extravaganza. If you haven't watched that, please watch it. It's a great show, and Greg and company always do a great job every year. But one of the things I mentioned during that, when we talked about Trey White, was just the fact that, like, when he came out of college at LSU, he was somebody that people seem to have a consensus on, in that he's a good athlete and he plays well in zone and man. So he kind of just sort of always felt like this high floor type of guy. And since he came into the NFL, he was put in a perfect situation where he was no longer just a high floor guy. He was a high ceiling guy, right? Like he immediately brought in high level cornerback play as a rookie. And has been a high level corner when he's healthy. But he's also coming off of an Achilles tear. We don't necessarily know when he'll be ready to go. But it does make me feel like they want to keep him around because outside of Trey White and Kyer Elam, you've got Christian Benford, who is more of a zone corner. And I don't think this is necessarily going to be like a huge, like, throw out the old book. We're putting in all new stuff, right? Like, I don't think it's going to be that dramatic. But I do think there will be, again, sort of a shift in going from a very heavy zone, like drop zone sort of scheme to something that's more mixing and matching coverages, doing more man, because this particular coach, Jahmile Addae, comes from Miami, but he spent a lot of time with Georgia and Kirby Smart and those Saban sort of defenses. And one of the things that Saban developed with Bill Belichick when they were in Cleveland together in the 90s was pattern matching coverages, which is, in a very simplified term, it's basically you're playing zone coverage until you're not, right? Which is you're playing your zone, but depending on the route or pattern that's being run, you are now going and staying with that guy in man coverage, essentially. That was something that they developed when they were in Cleveland together. Saban has just been a master at it in the college game. So that to me kind of signals maybe a shift more towards something like that. Again, Eric and Anthony and other people like that will have much better details about this than I will. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that there are going to be some shifts and changes with this defense, even if the bulk of it, the core of it, is probably largely going to stay the same. No?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, I think it's a good thing for the Bills, right? I think at points they kind of lived and died by the zone. Like, they're like, this is what we're best at. We're just going to stay in it. And if we're getting kind of ripped apart, so be it. Like, we can't shift out of it because we're not confident in our man packages. We'll stay in zone. Bringing in these different, coaches and changing up this defense a little bit and integrating a little bit more man should, in theory, make the Bills more dangerous because they can then shift if they need to into different schemes and different styles of play against certain quarterbacks. I think that's something that's honestly been missing to an extent in games against the Chiefs in the playoffs, is the Bills kind of are staying in what they think that they're best at. And I think they need to shift out of that from time to time. Granted, this year there was other issues, including the fact that we had to play AJ Klein as our starting linebacker. But yeah, as far as Jahmile Addae goes, the one thing I do whenever I see a coach, leave, or even a player for that matter, is I go look at the fans of the team where that person's leaving from. Right. And looking at the Miami Hurricane fans, they were livid that Jahmile Addae was going to the Bills. Like, they're like, no, we want him. We need him here. He's great. So the fact that the Miami Hurricane fans, which I don't think the Hurricanes have been good in a very long time.
Well, that was something I was going to say, is that Hurricanes fans have not been happy for a long time because they hate every single coach that they've had for most of the last couple of decades. And the fact that they have to like drive an hour in Miami traffic just to get to their own stadium, which is just still one of the most ridiculous things ever. But all that aside, right? Like, there's some college fan bases that are just like perpetually upset. But like you said, there's also those same sort of fan bases are also the types of fan bases that are very willing to say like, good riddance, see you later. And there is something to the fact that this is somebody that at least enough people knew about, where they felt like losing him was an actual big deal. So there is something to that. On to just the last couple of things. Christian Taylor is now a defensive quality control coach. DJ Mangas is now officially added as an offensive quality control coach. Mangas was the offensive coordinator at the University of Buffalo before that whole staff went down the tubes. And then because of his previous time with Joe Brady, when Brady was brought in as the interim offensive coordinator for the Bills, he basically called up Mangas and was like, hey, you want to hop on for the rest of the season and just kind of help me out? So now he has been officially added to the staff. along with Christian Taylor. Outside of that, I don't really have any takes about either of these two. So.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I can give any realistically valuable take on the two, but I do like the coaching shakeup, right? I do like pushing certain people out, bringing certain people in. I think that that's beneficial to the Bills because they have to change. Like we've seen kind of the same thing play out season after season after season. They have to make some sort of adjustment. And even though these are kind of minor things, except for Bobby Babbitt becoming the defensive coordinator, I think that this is a good thing. Now, could it end up being a bad thing at the end of the season? Could we be like,
sure,
every single one of these coaches sucks and we need to start over again? Yeah, that could happen. I don't think that will happen. I think that there's enough here, enough like talent or perceived talent that there's going to be a couple misses, but there could be a couple hits. And if Ronald Curry's a hit and if he elevates Josh Allen, we're going to be fine. If John Butler getting pushed out and Jahmile Addae coming in and the Bills defensive backs end up playing better, we're going to be fine. I think that these will be good changes. I'm not going to presume they're going to be massive where the Bills were a completely different team. But I think that this is interesting and a good thing for Buffalo.
I agree. That is pretty much going to do it for in terms of news. Obviously being out for a couple of weeks for us, things happened, and there's a lot of other shows that you should obviously check out while you're here at Cover One. Go look at the channels, look at all these different podcasts, see what tickles your fancy. But yeah, we didn't want to hit it too hard because there's already been enough talk about these guys, and we already have so much to talk about, and we're going to jump into that right now. So last time we were here, we did the AFC coaching cycle. There were quite a few guys that we had to talk about. We're going to move on to the NFC now. We're going to start with the Philadelphia Eagles, who had quite the shakeup during the last month or so. They fired both of their coordinators. Brian Johnson, their offensive coordinator, is out. Sean Desai and Matt Patricia, I guess, also out. Just a whole messy situation there. Kellen Moore is now brought in as the offensive coordinator, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys and most recently from the LA Chargers. And Vic Fangio has now been brought in. He was somebody that seemed to be who the Eagles wanted last year, but due to some tampering shenanigans with the Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon and the Dolphins wanting him as well, and he ends up going to the Dolphins and then leaving the Dolphins after 1 year. So now they are back on the Fangio train. It's interesting because Sean Desai is somebody who runs that Fangio scheme. Clearly not as well as Vic Fangio because that defense really took a step off, and they were always going to take a step back from what Jonathan Gannon had done the year before. Eagles fans were kind of crucifying Jonathan Gannon from the moment he got there in 2021. 2021? Am I mathing correctly? 2021. Yeah. So it's funny that they felt like they probably got an upgrade in Sean Desai, and then immediately they realize, oh, this is not an upgrade. And look, there was always going to be some sort of drop off just based on how they played in 2022, right? Getting 70 sacks is a difficult number to replicate. It just is. But that being said, you still had enough talent to do something here, and the Eagles defense did not do that. They had like a few, like maybe 2 good games, and one of them was against Miami where their defensive line just obliterated the Dolphins the entire game. That was essentially it. If the defensive line did not win up front, that Eagles defense was screwed, and after a while it just got to be too much for them. And Desai eventually loses his play calling abilities. Matt Patricia takes over. It shockingly gets worse because like Matt Patricia's like changeup was to just run a bunch of 5-man fronts, which did nothing to help them. And really the beautiful cherry on top of this whole disaster for the Eagles was losing to the Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia to continue their streak of losses. I mean, it was quite impressive, and especially because Desai and Patricia's defense was the thing that ultimately lost them that game against the Cardinals. So it's not surprising that they were fired. It's not surprising that they bring Vic Fangio in. Brian Johnson, this is sort of what's interesting to me, right? Because Brian Johnson was a first-year play caller. The offense really struggled. There were games where they played really, really well, but it was largely because they just won with who they had from a talent perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Devontae Smith and AJ Brown are a great pair of receivers, and they can beat just about anyone on any given Sunday. Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback who, can present different looks because he can run the ball really effectively, and he's got really good velocity from an arm strength perspective. So he could do. You have to defend all different levels of the field. They have a great offensive line, all that sort of stuff. But after a certain point, I mean, as somebody who watched a lot of Eagles games this year, it was maddening watching this team run the exact same concepts every single week. And especially you anybody who watched that wild card game against the Bucks probably all thought the same thing, which is, why are you not helping your quarterback against the blitz? You're not giving him hots. You're not giving him extra protection. You're not doing a single thing to help your quarterback. You're in empty the entire time. You're doing 5-man protections against 6- and 7-man pressures. You're doing nothing to help your quarterback. And it was like that the entire season. They didn't change it for a single second against the team in the Bucks, who, like, in the opposite perspective, like, Todd Bowles has the same problem where he does the same thing. He just blitzes and blitzes to no end. And the Eagles knew that, and they did nothing about it. And Todd Bowles knew that the Eagles did that, and he was like, heck yeah, you guys keep doing that. I'm going to win this game by just being as stubborn as you guys are. It's just, coaches, man. Coaches really do drive me crazy. It's wild. This is why I get so obsessed with coaches, because they just do the dumbest things sometimes. And it's funny because I really don't remember. I wish I did. There was a podcast I was listening to. I want to say it was the Mina Kimes show. I want to say it was Ryan Clark that she had on to talk about Brian Johnson. I could be totally wrong, but Brian Johnson knew whoever this was. I assume Ryan Clark. They were players together or whatever or something. And when Brian Johnson was a player, people around him felt very strongly that he was going to be a very good coach one day because he was super detailed and very open to different ideas. And when you watch this Eagles offense, it looked like the opposite of that. It looked like the exact same things every single week. Here's the thing, though. Going back to when Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator there, he's now the head coach in Indianapolis. The style and philosophy of the offense really wasn't that different. It was a lot of simple concepts. It was a lot of basic stuff. But there was a big difference, though. The Steichen was able to change things up when he needed to, especially in game. And you see that with the Colts, right? That this whole season, the fact that they had to deal with all the different injuries that they had, like, he still managed to roll with it. He still managed to make things work despite having a limited quarterback in Gardner Minshew, despite having, Jonathan Taylor in and out of the lineup. Like, he managed to make it work. They weren't a great team necessarily, but they almost made the playoffs, and they won enough games to make you feel like, okay, he knows what he's doing, and it's very obvious he knows what he's doing. You look at Brian Johnson, and it just felt like he was in over his head. And I don't know if this is like a Brian Johnson thing or a Nick Sirianni thing, right? Because Nick Sirianni is the one who ultimately seems to be the common denominator between these two, right? Where he came from with Frank Reich when he was in Indianapolis, and Sirianni was the offensive coordinator there. Like, one of the guys that they brought in after Andrew Luck suddenly retired was Phillip Rivers. And Phillip Rivers was one of these quarterbacks who kind of just ran his own thing, where once he got to the line of scrimmage, he just spent all like 25 seconds of the play clock telling every single receiver, hey, you're coming here. Hey, you're going here. You're going here. You're going here. I'm going to run this offense from the line of scrimmage, essentially. It wasn't quite Peyton Manning-esque, but it was similar in that sense, where he's the one who's really running the offense. He's the one who's adjusting things as he sees it on the field and getting guys to just be in the right position where he wants them to be, right? It kind of makes me feel like Sirianni took that sort of style and has just been like pushing it onto his guys and his offense in Philadelphia. And when you have somebody like Shane Steichen, who knows how to call plays for Jalen Hurts, right? Because Jalen Hurts is not necessarily doing all that Phillip Rivers, Peyton Manning sort of stuff. It's not to say that Jalen Hurts can't like do things like that. It's just that he's not at that level, right? And few people are. But it's frustrating to see Steichen have the ability to like work around problems, and Brian Johnson just continue to run into the exact same problems every single week. And that's ultimately what led to the Eagles' demise for the season and his demise as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, you know way more about the Eagles than me. I'm very well aware of that. So just for my 2 cents on the two guys they brought in, right, being Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore, I look at Vic Fangio, and the thing as a Bills fan that makes me very happy is he's out of Miami. And that's not because I thought that he made Miami's defense great this year. That's because I think everybody knew that was a 2-year project for Miami. It was going to take 2 years of Vic Fangio, and year 2 was when you were going to see that defense take off. Now Vic Fangio is gone, so I don't have to worry about that year 2 being better, and they're going to start over again with a new defensive scheme. So for me, I think that's a win for the Bills. For the Eagles, yeah, bringing in Vic Fangio as a very experienced defensive play caller, I think that that's a great move from them because you can trust him that he's going to be able to implement something and do something to make that defense as good as they should be. There's too much talent on that defense to deal with all the stuff they dealt with this year. On the other side of the ball with Kellen Moore, that's where more of my concern is. I think that Kellen Moore kind of got this weird aura that he was a wonderkin, right? Like people were like, oh my God, Kellen Moore, great play caller. Well, I think we're starting to see a little bit of issues with Kellen Moore. We saw him leave Dallas, and then when he left Dallas, now Dak Prescott has the best year of his career. Like Dak was better than he's ever been. CeeDee Lamb, arguably top 3 receiver in the NFL this past year. If not, you could probably argue he's the best receiver in the NFL, and that offense cooked. Then he goes to the Chargers, and then all of a sudden, like, that Chargers team, Brandon Staley deserves a lot of the blame for it, but Kellen Moore's a part of it. Like, you got Justin Herbert, you have Mike Williams, you have Keenan Allen, you have Austin Eckler, you have Quentin Johnson, who doesn't look like he's going to pan out to be much, but there's so much talent on that team, and that offense just seemingly never does enough. And Kellen Moore was a part of that this past year. Now you put Kellen Moore on the Eagles. I presume there's so much talent on that team. I don't know how you can fail. Granted, we just saw a coach fail with the Eagles with all of that talent. I do wonder, though, if Kellen Moore is going to be able to elevate them. And if he can't elevate them and all of a sudden the Eagles go through a similar thing this year that they went through last year, or get worse, then I think you would agree Nick Sirianni is in big trouble, right? Yeah.
And Nick Sirianni and Mike McCarthy are kind of the two big guys in my mind, probably Robert Saleh as well, who are like coming into the season, you're on the hot seat, right? Like those to me are the big 3 names where it's like, you got to put up or shut up at this point. And I have more faith in Kellen Moore probably than you do. I like Kellen Moore. I think there was a lot of details when you go back to those Dallas offenses with Dak that were there, and he does. There's one thing that I think he does really well, which is just coming up with really creative solutions in end of game situations. He sometimes it looks real silly, sometimes it looks dumb, sometimes it doesn't work out. But like, you go back to that wild card game they had against the Niners a couple years ago, where they ran that QB draw to try and set up the field goal. They had enough time to do it. The problem was that that Dak just gave the ball to the center and not the referee, and so the referee had to take the ball from the center and spot it. And then you run out of time. But the play call in that situation was correct. That was they had enough time to do it. They had in mind to get the ball spiked and set up a field goal. It should have worked. It just didn't work out because of a dumb mistake. And maybe you could put that on coaching as well. Maybe you need to like reemphasize that point, whatever. But regardless of that, right? Like he knows how to, I think, attack certain areas against defenses where they're weak. And I think that that's important for or for an offensive coordinator, is to understand what your core is, right? And then shift it to where you're going, right? I think that was something that Daboll did really well when he was in Buffalo, was just being able to sort of morph the offense to attack what they were going to be able to do. And part of that was just because they ran so many option routes and had guys like Cole Beasley and Gabe Davis and Diggs who were just super smart and knew where to go and knew exactly where to attack against those defenses, etc. But yeah, it's detailed stuff. And this is somebody who's been a play caller for a number of years now instead of a first-year guy. I think this has a chance of working out, but like, it's really gotta at this point. There's no like, hey, maybe we can, get into the wild card and tough loss. It's like, no, you need to like show that you're still a contender right now.
I think you made a great point. The three names you named, Mike McCarthy, Nick Sirianni, and Robert Saleh, like those three this year. Mike McCarthy has to at least make it to the NFC champ. I think all of them probably have to make it to the championship game to keep their jobs. I don't think anything less than that would be like Robert Saleh. I'm confident. Like I actually spent a lot of time today thinking about this. I think Saleh has to make the Super Bowl, otherwise he's fired. And I know that's crazy take, but they're on the verge of a hard Aaron Rodgers isn't playing 2 more years. I don't care what Jets fans think, he's not. So if they don't make the Super Bowl this year, then Saleh's done. Like, because they have to start all over again. Where Mike McCarthy and Nick Sirianni, I think, maybe get a little bit more a cushion there. But the NFC is so weak for the most part that I feel like it should be a foregone conclusion that you should at least make the NFC Championship game there.
I think, honestly, if the Jets just win a playoff game, I think Saleh is safe. Because they currently have, like, the longest playoff drought, right? They're not the longest team without a playoff win, mind you, because that belongs to the Dolphins. Yeah. Which is still, it's honestly so funny because it's, like, almost parallel to the Bills and the Bengals before they broke their respective droughts, where the Bills had the longest playoff drought, but the Bengals had the longest playoff win drought at the same time. It was kind of, even though they made the playoffs like 5 straight years with Marvin Lewis and Andy Dalton. Anyway, no, I think if they win a playoff game, Robert Saleh will like be viewed as a hero for that franchise.
I think Mike McDaniel, now that you say it too, I think Mike McDaniel's in that group too. I don't know how much time he's got left. I know that he's this great offensive play caller, but at the same, he hasn't won a playoff game yet, and he's got all the talent in the world on that offensive side of the ball, and they fall off a cliff at the end of every year. Like, if the Dolphins make the playoffs next year as a wild card again and lose in the wild card round, I think he's fired. Like, I think he can either win the division and not win a playoff game, or not win the division and win a playoff game. That keeps his job. If he doesn't win the division and doesn't win a playoff game, done.
I don't know about that, because like the part of the reason why Flores got fired from Miami, despite the success that he had, was just because he rubbed people the wrong way and like constantly was screwing with the offense by changing out offensive coordinators every year, and especially screwing with a young quarterback like Tua, right? Like that's, I think, the biggest thing that became a problem, among other things. Obviously, there's a whole other laundry list of things that happened between Flores and Miami. But like McDaniel and the Dolphins organization, like their relationship seems pretty healthy. There doesn't seem to be a lot of friction between them. So I'd be surprised, even if they lost another playoff game, if he was just outright fired. I don't know if I really see that happening, but I do think the pressure is on, where if you have basically the same results happen, like you win 10 plus games, you lose in the wild card, then you're going to start thinking like, all right, something's got to change here, right? Like you can't just keep doing this for a 4th straight year, 3rd year maybe, but I don't know. I'd be surprised if Mike McDaniel's seat was like that hot coming into the season. Moving on to the Dallas Cowboys. who are having to make some big changes because they kept Mike McCarthy, but Dan Quinn, who's been their defensive coordinator for the last couple of years, is now out. He is now the head coach in Washington, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. And his replacement is Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer is back in the NFL, folks. And if you're not excited about the potential things to happen between Mike Zimmer and Nick Sirianni, then your blood ain't pumping right. Oh, baby, those two on the same field together. That's going to be fun. But it's so Mike Zimmer was the Vikings head coach for a long time, actually. Like it always felt like he waited 8 years. Yeah, that's a long time. Time in the NFL. He had varying degrees of success, right? He went all the way to the NFC Championship. He also had some really down years in between. Like he had some great playoff wins, some great moments in Minnesota Vikings history, some not so much. And Zimmer, I think at the end of the day, was somebody who was older, and his personality really rubbed some people the wrong way. He's a very distinct, unapologetic way of coaching and talking. If you've never experienced who Mike Zimmer is, just look up Mike Zimmer on YouTube. You'll find what you're looking for eventually. He is quite the personality in the NFL. And it's actually interesting because I think in his introductory press conference with the Cowboys, he said something to the effect of like, I know some people think I'm a jerk, but there's nothing I can do about that. And it's like, that is the tagline of jerks, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
That's like some people think that I have this problem, but I don't think so, and I can't do anything about that. It's just like I've been rewatching a lot of Top Chef recently, and it's just like that is like the refrain of all the sort of jerky like chefs contestants that are on there. It's just like, I know some people think that I'm some jackass or whatever, but I'm just here to win and I'm here to do what I do, and there's nothing I could do about that. And it's just like, you could win and not be a jackass, right? Yeah. Like that's a thing you're allowed to do. But regardless of all of that, Mike Zimmer is a very, very good defensive coach, and Dallas, quite frankly, is very lucky to have found him and gotten him. Where the NFL is moving a lot more towards like simulated pressures and creepers and that sort of thing as trends on the defensive side, Zimmer was ahead of a lot of people in terms of that. He had been doing that stuff for years. He's been in Dallas before when he was on Bill Parcells' staff in the mid 2000s. He was the defensive coordinator there. So they're familiar, at least Jerry Jones is familiar with who Mike Zimmer is and that personality. And at the end of the day, I think Jerry Jones is sick of losing in the playoffs, and especially having the defense collapse in the way that it always seems to collapse. Dan Quinn did a lot of great things for Dallas as the defensive coordinator, but there was a clear mindset of like, I don't care about the run game. I will build an entire defense out of the lightest players imaginable to stop the pass. And if we get gashed in the run game, then we get gashed in the run game. That's all well and good until you get gashed in the run game and it really, really matters, right? Like in the playoffs. And especially if your passing defense also sucks at that time, then there's really nothing you can do. You kind of just sit there with your hands and go, we're done. That's it. Nothing can be done about this. So there's obviously a clear shift in what they want to do. Mike Zimmer, I think, is the right shift to do.
Yeah, I remember Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. I'm pretty sure I remember some sort of press conference where he had an eye patch on or something. Something happened to his eye at one point. That's my recollection of Mike Zimmer. But I know Mike Zimmer's old, and I wanted to see how old is Mike Zimmer. So I just looked it up. He started his career at the age of 38 with the Dallas Cowboys. The year that was 1994. He started his career at 38 in 1994 with the Dallas Cowboys. this is an old man now as a defensive coordinator. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going to lose Dan Quinn, who, like you said, did a lot of really good things for the Cowboys, bringing in Mike Zimmer's not a massive drop off. If anything, it could be an improvement. So I don't think that this is a bad move for the Cowboys at all.
Yeah, I think this was the right move because you'll still run like your base 4-down defense. It'll just have a more normal group of personnel, right? And you'll still have guys like Trayvon Diggs, who's coming back from injury. You still have Deron Bland. And, maybe Zimmer will tone down how they play defensive back, right? Because Dan Quinn kind of just told Al Harris, the defensive backs coach, like, hey, just have them attack the ball, right? Like, I don't care if they give up some yards or whatever. I don't care if they give up 100 yards. If they get 2 interceptions in this game, that's what I care about, right? And Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs took that to heart, and they generate a lot of turnovers. But man, they sure do get beat. And it's a tough thing. Yeah, it's tough.
Dude,
but
it's going to be wild when they have those two guys on the field. I don't know if they re-signed Stephon Gilmore. I'm presuming they didn't. So it would be Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs. Like, talk about air the ball out against the Cowboys. Just throw it deep every time. If they're still playing the way they've been playing their entire careers, those two, you can just beat them deep every single time, and maybe they get a pick.
Moves all day long, oh my God, man. Yes. Just go for it. That's the big thing with the Cowboys. I'm sure there's been a couple other little things. Joe Witt Jr., who was the defensive backs coach, went with Dan Quinn to the Commanders. So that's a thing for them. Moving on to the Giants, they had a lot of changes. And I imagine that pressure came from ownership, who were probably very dissatisfied following up Daboll's first year, where they went to the playoffs and won a playoff game, and following up with the best thing happening for them being Tommy DeVito for a couple of games, right? It's just it's like that's not what I want to hang my franchise around. So they fired their special teams coordinator. They fired former Bills offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. They got rid of a couple of defensive assistants. Wink Martindale, the well-known defensive coordinator, outright resigned. Very interesting. Clearly, there was friction between him and Daboll, unsurprisingly. Martindale, funnily enough, is now the defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan. It's funny because that's where Mike Macdonald, who was the Ravens defensive coordinator, came from. And Macdonald was the one who replaced Martindale in Baltimore with the Ravens. And now it's again, coaching circles are weird, man. This is what makes things funny to me. Their running backs coach was supposed to be a part of this team this year until he left to go to Syracuse to be their offensive coordinator. They interviewed like a whole gamut of people to be defensive coordinator, including Bobby Babbage, Denard Wilson, Brendan Daly, Derek Ansley, Anthony Campanile, and Shane Bowen. And Shane Bowen is the guy that they ultimately bring in. Shane Bowen, for those who are not in the know, was the Titans defensive coordinator for the last couple of years with Mike Vrabel. I always felt Shane Bowen was kind of a underrated coach. I think whenever you watch, whenever people brought up like, oh, Tennessee's so well coached, Tennessee just like Vrabel always has his team ready, and it's like, true, right? Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, but like, who were the coordinators? Like, for a long time, the attention was about Arthur Smith because he kind of transformed Ryan Tannehill's career after he got like exiled out of Miami. But with the defense, it was like nobody ever brought up Shane Bowen, despite the fact that like they've had a lot of picks and some of them haven't worked out on that side of the ball. But more often than not, it always felt like that Titans defense would come up in big moments. And they were always trying different things in the back end with coverages. The defensive line always played well, and it obviously helps to have somebody like Jeffrey Simmons up front. But still, like it always felt like whenever I watched Titans games and watched their defense, they were trying a lot of different creative things. So bringing somebody like Shane Bowen to New York, somebody who's probably less of a stubborn jackass like Wink Martindale is. I say jackass just because he's clearly somebody who does whatever he wants to do, and that's kind of what got him kicked out of Baltimore and New York. Now it's like, he blitzes 60-70% of the time, and it's not little blitzes. It's like, I'm gonna come at your face and I don't care what you do kind of blitzing. Like it's tough. And yeah, there's probably times where you're the head coach and thinking, hey, could you just not do that like 2 or 3 fewer times in a game? Like just like a couple times. Can you just dial it back a little bit? And he obviously did not do that and didn't care to take any lessons from anybody else. So I think Shane Bowen could be a genuinely potentially a really good upgrade for this team. The Giants defense is talented. There are guys on that defense that are very, very good. Bobby Okereke was great for them last year.
Phenomenal.
Truly one of the best free agent signings of last year was bringing in Okereke, because what they had at linebacker the year before was abysmal. Bringing in Okereke is probably one of the biggest jumps in talent that any team got last year. So you have him, you have Dexter Lawrence, who is phenomenal. You've got guys on the back end like Xavier McKinney. Like there's guys on this defense. They just need to not be quite so one note on defense.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start, but I actively root against the Giants now. I did not do that prior to the 2023 season or 2022 season. 2023 season, sorry. The reason I root against him is, one, I have no idea why they extended Daniel Jones. It still blows my mind to this day, and it was a completely disastrous thing that completely altered their franchise and set them back, in my opinion. So that was just my own being pissed off about them. And then their stupid fans spending the entire offseason talking about how they were going to trade for Stephon Diggs and truly believing it and never getting off that led me to a point where I said, you know what? They're in my bottom 5 teams. I root against them whenever I can. So when I saw the absolute chaos between Wink Martindale and Brian Daboll, I was like, yes, I ate that up. I drank the tears of Giants fans. And to this day, I continue to drink them. I hope that they go 0-17 this year. I literally hope they lose every game because I despise that team and I despise that fan base, it's crazy that it literally took one off season for that to happen to me. Prior to that, I was like, yeah, I like the Giants. They beat Tom Brady twice in the playoffs. Now I could care less about them. They can just die in hell with all the other awful teams like the Panthers. I'm sorry. I have a very strong opinion against the Giants now.
That's great. I love that. Love it. My Eagles fandom is very much agreeing with all of that. I'm fully in favor of all this. Moving on. We kind of talked about this a little bit already. The Commanders have hired Dan Quinn as their head coach. Joe Witt Jr., the defensive backs coach from the Cowboys, went with him to be their defensive coordinator. And Cliff Kingsbury is back from Thailand, folks. And he is the Washington Commanders' new offensive coordinator. And that's after he agreed to be the Raiders' offensive coordinator and said, nope, I have a better offer, actually. It's very weird to me that Cliff Kingsbury is an in-demand offensive mind in the NFL. Because, like, in college, like, his offense was kind of known to be, like, very spread out, air raid, fun, right? Like, he had Manziel when he was at Texas A&M. He had Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech. But at the end of the day, right, like, those teams weren't very successful. And in Arizona, it's funny because one of the biggest challenges that Cliff Kingsbury faced when he went from Texas Tech to Arizona with the Cardinals was the fact that his offenses at Texas Tech were like basically 10 personnel the entire time. He never really recruited tight ends because they didn't exist in his offense. You can't do that in the NFL. And then when he got in the NFL and had to face that, he didn't just like say, okay, well, I'll run 11 personnel a little bit. He like leaned heavily into running 11, 12 personnel and using tight ends a lot. I don't really know where that came from. I don't know if it's just the guys that he brought onto his staff that he just like really took in all the information. I was like, oh, well, this is something that I gotta do. I gotta do this because I know I have to use tight ends now. I don't know what really happened there. I don't really know how I feel about Cliff Kingsbury. Those offenses in Arizona always felt very, very static, very samey every year. They always started off hot and just never finished down the stretch. I don't know, man. This is just a weird hire. And especially when you have the second overall pick and probably, either Drake May or Caleb Williams on your doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather give them someone else to like grow these quarterbacks.
Dude, I literally think this was all panic from the Commanders because I think they wanted Ben Johnson from the Lions, and then
they clearly wanted Ben Johnson.
Yes.
That's very clear by the very public spin cycle they've put after being rejected by Ben Johnson.
So then they panicked and they're like, okay, Dan Quinn, let's get Dan Quinn, and then they're like, we need offense, Cliff Kingsbury, and it's like this seems to me like it's a one and done year for this entire coaching staff, and then they're going to try to get somebody like Ben Johnson again next year, unless somehow Dan Quinn can pull a playoff appearance out of this team, but I don't see that happening. And like you said, the second round pick or the second overall pick, it's going to be one of those quarterbacks, and I feel bad for that quarterback because they're going into a no-win situation. Like, this team isn't going to be good next year, and this coaching staff seems like, to me, in my opinion, a lame duck coaching staff that was literally panic purchased because Ben Johnson was like, nah, I am not going to Washington. Hell no.
I agree in the fact that this was clearly their second or third choice, right? Like that was obvious from anybody who was watching from the outside. I don't know if this is necessarily a lame duck staff because I think Dan Quinn is a genuinely good coach. I think he'll kind of endear himself to ownership. But and honestly, I don't think they're going to be the worst team in that division next year. It's very possible. It's certainly possible that like 3 coaches in that division might get fired at the end of 2024, and none of them are Dan Quinn.
And that is a good opinion, man. Yeah. Okay. I can sign up for that. I can see that.
It's possible. I'm not saying that's gonna happen. It would be crazy if it did, but like, it's possible, right? Like, if the Cowboys win that division, but they fail in the playoffs again, Mike McCarthy's probably out. If Nick Sirianni doesn't get his crew together, he's probably out. If the Giants probably don't win enough games, Dable's probably out. Like, there's a lot of dominoes that can fall in the NFC East. And Dan Quinn, it's not the most exciting hire. And I don't think he's going to take them over the top and suddenly make them this like hard to beat, like, run the division type of franchise. But they needed someone who could just, in a way, this is sort of like Ron Rivera plus, right? Like somebody who's respectable, somebody who's going to maintain a good culture with this team, but is not necessarily going to be the guy that take you over the top. And I think he'll win more games than Ron Rivera. He'll probably blow fewer games than Ron Rivera. He'll, be better overall. He certainly has more. I think does he have more winning seasons than Ron Rivera? He might.
Probably.
I think they have the same number of winning seasons, which is hilarious to me because Dan Quinn was in Atlanta for 5 years and Ron Rivera was the head coach for like 15 straight years or something like that. It's very funny.
Well, here's a question. If let's say the Commanders, I'm just making up a number here. Let's say they're down 37-0 with under a minute left to play and they're, in field goal range. Do you think that Dan Quinn will kick a field goal, or will he like let Drake May kind of throw the ball and just he might get shut out, but like will he kick the field goal?
I'd like to say that he wouldn't kick a field goal. To argue that point, though, if you'd like to look up on YouTube the NFL's worst coaching decision from Secret Base, you'll be very well informed about some of the blunders that Dan Quinn can bring himself into. Very interesting video. Worth watching. It's pretty fascinating. Moving on. We're moving on to the NFC North. The Lions, who everyone thought they were going to lose Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator. And lo and behold, he's back again. He's running it back. And Lions fans should be very ecstatic about that because Ben Johnson is a very good offensive coordinator. He's not. It's funny because Ben Johnson is a very good offensive coordinator, but he's not the offensive coordinator that everyone thinks that he is, right? Like everyone sort of views him as like, oh, he's this super innovative, like, and by innovative they mean pass happy, right? Like that's what that means more to general media people, right? Like innovative is just like, oh, he throws the ball a bunch. It's like that offense runs through the run game, right? Like this is a Dan Campbell team. They want to pound the rock. They drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. They brought in David Montgomery. They want to run the ball. They have a great offensive line to do that. Like it works, right? And that's sort of the thing that people don't always understand is like these great offenses that they sort of see a lot of highlights from. More often than not, they're very they're more run oriented than you might think, right? Like, and that's sort of what the Bills have also been trying to shift more towards in the last couple of years. So that's not very surprising. But with Ben Johnson, like this, good for the Lions for being able to keep him and Aaron Glenn. If we're being honest, I think the Lions defense has taken hits and from people within the media and their fans because they're always just like a little bit off, right? Like they're just not in position. There's always somebody that's looking at another guy like, why aren't you here? Or why aren't you like you're supposed to be, whatever it is. But I think one more year with Aaron Glenn, get a couple extra pieces in there because they still have draft capital. They still have cap space to kind of make a big push. I think there's a chance that you see this defense take another step and you see both Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson probably leave next year.
Yeah, I'm with you on that last part. Like, I think both probably leave next year and get at least Ben Johnson will get a head coaching job next year. I think he essentially just didn't want the one that was available. Like we said before, he could have had it.
And that's fine.
He just didn't want it.
That's fair. Yeah. Honestly, good for him for recognizing, like, this isn't a situation I want to be in. And I don't want to force myself into a situation. Maybe this costs me a head coaching job in the future, but also Josh McDaniels got a second chance after spurning the Colts and turning the Broncos into a dumpster fire. So I think my odds are pretty good. And honestly, I would probably agree with him. So,
and I truly think what he wants is he wants that Kansas City job or that Buffalo job. But I don't want to get into that whole Buffalo job thing. But I do think he wants one of those quarterbacks. And it's like, does Andy Reid retire after next year? Do the Bills move on for? So I think he's waiting for his right opportunity. And when that right opportunity shows up, when one of those elite teams kind of moves on from their head coach, Ben Johnson will be the first in line and he can have the pick of the jobs he wants. I truly believe that.
Future Bears head coach Ben Johnson. You heard it here. Moving on to the Bears. They got rid of most of their offensive staff. Their QB coach, their wide receiver coach, their running back coach, their assistant tight ends coach, and their offensive coordinator all out. They bring in Shane Waldron from the Seahawks to be their new offensive coordinator. I like Shane Waldron. Some Seahawks fans don't like Shane Waldron, which kind of reinforces my idea that he's actually pretty good. I think that he just has a good way of, he's one of these Shanahan guys, right? They run the ball a bunch, more zone oriented in terms of the run game. And they build their passing game off of that. I think he's done a good job. He did a really good job with Geno Smith in Seattle. They now have the first overall pick. Whoever they end up getting, whether it's Drake May or Caleb Williams, whoever they decide to pick, I think Shane Waldron is a
JJ McCarthy.
Shut up. We're not doing this.
I'm just saying.
I am not doing JJ McCarthy discourse on this podcast.
I'm just saying their head coach said he's the best quarterback in the draft.
I'm not doing this. I'm not listening to this. I am not acknowledging this. We're not talking about JJ McCarthy as a first overall pick. We're not doing this right now. I am be gone. Get behind me, Satan. Oh my God, that made me angry. So Shane Waldron is the other offensive coordinator. I think it's a good hire. Eric Washington, former Bills defensive line coach. You're making me so tilted off of that. I'm so mad right now. My God. Eric Washington is the other defensive coordinator. Do you have any obviously Eric Washington leaving the Bills. Some people felt strongly that this was a good thing for them. Look, I have my issues with Eric Washington. You could honestly make a case for Eric Washington being a bad defensive line coach and also Eric Washington being a good defensive line coach.
100%.
Guys like Gregory Rousseau were good, right? Ed Oliver turned into a great player because of Ed Oliver's obviously talented, but also Eric Washington was his defensive line coach for the majority of his time here, right? Like Ed Oliver has had his best seasons with Eric Washington as his defensive line coach. I understand that some people feel like he didn't get enough out of some guys, but at the end of the day, like this is somebody who has enough of an idea of what's going on and has coached up some good guys. I don't know if this is the right move for Chicago. I don't know if keeping Eberflus was the right move for Chicago either as their head coach. I guess you could say he did enough with that defense once they traded for Montez Sweat. That defense obviously took a step up. But again, this more than anything feels like a lame duck situation. And honestly, it reminds me a little too much of Matt Nagy, where they kept him for a year longer than they should have. They drafted Justin Fields. That first year was a disaster with Justin Fields. They couldn't do anything. And I think it hurt Justin Fields' development. And, maybe Justin Fields largely turns out the same way, but maybe he doesn't if they just give him a reasonable starting path. I don't know. This whole Chicago thing feels very tenuous, and I don't necessarily love this whole situation, even though I do like Shane Waldron and I respect Eric Washington.
Yeah, I just don't think it makes any sense what they're doing, keeping Matt Eberflus. Like, you have the number 1 pick in the draft and the number 9 pick in the draft. You can basically recreate your entire team and start fresh. Then start fresh. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
I feel like they're just kind of wasting lame duck. That's exactly, like, you hit the nail on the head there. That's what it is, and it doesn't make sense to do that right now.
Yeah, it's weird. And if I'm a Bears fan, I'm feeling optimistic about having a new quarterback, but I'm also feeling a little dejected about the fact that quarterback has to have Matt Eberflus as his head coach. And I like Matt Eberflus as that's it. But yeah, God, it's gonna drive me insane the rest of the podcast. It's just gonna sit here in the back of my mind the rest of the time. God, disgusting. So moving on to the Green Bay Packers. The oft maligned defensive coordinator Joe Barry is now out, much to the happiness and joy of many Packers fans who were very frustrated with Joe Barry. Joe Barry, it was the right move to fire him. He stayed on too long. He stayed on too long because the players liked him and he was good with players. And there were times where Joe Barry would put together some really good games, but at the end of the day, there were too many times where that defense, I mean, I'm still thinking about Tommy DeVito going right down the field on what that was Monday night, right? Was that the Monday night doubleheader where the Dolphins also gave up that game against the Titans?
Will Levis.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure.
I want to say that was
on December
same...
11th. Monday,
that
December 11th.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds right. Let's say it is. Who's fact checking me anyway? So, yeah, I still have memories of Tommy DeVito just going right down the field with zero resistance against the Joe Barry defense that, like, come on, like that you can't have that happen. What's interesting though is his replacement is Jeff Hafley, who, if you've never heard of him, is probably because you don't watch a lot of Boston college football. And I don't really blame you. I don't either, but it's very odd that a college coach left that job as a head coach to be an NFL defensive coordinator, at least on the surface, right? Because we're used to college coaches just sort of staying and being where they are and staying in college. But with the college game going the direction that it's going, I think some coaches at these basically non-blue blood programs are basically saying, well, if nobody gives a shit about us, then why am I here?
Yeah.
And if opportunity comes knocking where I get to be the defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers, see ya. Like, I feel bad for the kids that I'm leaving behind, but like at a certain point, enough's enough, and I can't do this anymore. And I think I'm putting words in Jeff Hafley's mouth. I have no idea why he actually left, but I imagine that's part of it. They also bring in Derek Ansley as their passing game coordinator on defense. He was getting some looks as a defensive coordinator. I know he was one of the guys that the Giants interviewed. He was the defensive play caller for the Chargers after Brandon Staley got fired. They also bring in, I'm gonna double check this because I thought this was kind of interesting when it happened. And this is correct. So Anthony Campanile, who was the linebackers coach for the Dolphins last year, and who some Dolphins fans felt like was going to be the heir apparent to Vic Fangio after he left for Philadelphia, is now the Packers linebackers coach and run game coordinator, which feels like a low-key underrated hire for them, for somebody that like some people felt like was going to be a like successor for defensive coordinator, is now just your run game coordinator, linebackers coach. Like, good for them for being able to do that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Packers overhaul on defense for their staff or what, but
Yeah, for the Packers, like I trust Matt LaFleur with their offense. I mean, considering what they did last year on the offensive side of the ball with the presumed lack of talent or unproven talent, I trust Matt LaFleur on that side of the ball, but they had to fix the defensive side of the ball. I don't know anything about Jeff Hafley besides the fact that he coached at Boston College. The one thing I would wonder if I was a Packers fan is what style coach is he? So you referenced like players coach, what have you. Is he more a disciplinarian? Because that's what that defense needs. You can't have Jair Alexander walking out to do the coin toss because he feels like it's his time to do the coin toss. You can't have Quay Walker shoving medical personnel on the field. Like, you need somebody there that's going to be like, we're not doing this anymore. We're not playing these stupid games. I don't know if Jeff Hafley's that guy. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but they need someone in there to kind of take control of that locker room or that side of the locker room. If he's that guy, maybe he can pull the talent out of these players, because Jair Alexander, to a point, took a step back last year and went absolutely crazy. I don't know if that's going to become a big problem for the Packers moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, who made no major changes from what I saw. So we're moving on from them as well. Moving on to the Panthers, who made an interesting hire. So if you've been living under the proverbial rock in terms of NFL news, you may not know the saga of Carolina Panthers owner Dave Tepper since he's bought this franchise. Dave Tepper had Ron Rivera as his head coach when he bought the franchise. He gave Ron Rivera another year. I think that was fair of him to do that. I think that was a reasonable thing to do, a respectful thing to do. I think that was that to me kind of felt like, okay, Tepper is smart enough, calm enough to not just go wholesale changes right off the bat, but knowing that he's going to make a change if he has to. But he's going to give Rivera a chance, a genuine, real chance. And he did. Rivera didn't deliver. He gets rid of Rivera. Fine. Whatever. But he kept Marty Herney, the general manager, for some reason. And then hired Matt Rule to not like a little deal. This was a major, big money deal. And he introduced him at his first press conference with Imagine Dragons playing in the background, which kind of felt like, like, oh yeah, I'm the cool dad energy. You know what I mean? Like, it's just something about that felt off from the start. And that was proven right because Matt Rule's tenure in Carolina was abysmal almost from the start. It was bad, and it got worse and worse as time went on. And then they fired Marty Herney as the GM after the first year. They bring in Scott Fitterer to be the GM, even though him and Matt Rule never had an actual relationship prior to that. It's just all sorts of bizarre things. Matt Rule was kind of just like a snake oil salesman for most of his time in Carolina. He got fired in the middle of his third year. Steve Wilkes came in as the interim head coach and basically said, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to win football games. And they won quite a few football games with Steve Wilkes. And they did it by running the ball, which like Matt Rule kept saying they should do and then never did. And then Steve Wilkes gets in there and that's the first thing they do. It's just kind of funny how, some people actually do what they say they're going to do. Kind of funny how that works. But now you bring in Frank. So then they bring in Frank Reich. It feels like, okay, you have the first overall pick now that you traded up to get that first overall pick with Chicago, gave up quite a bit to do it. You have Frank Reich. You have a pretty strong coaching staff. Deuce Staley, Josh McCown, Ajiro Rivero as your defensive coordinator. Like there was some buzz about Carolina coming into this year. Not that they would be like some playoff team or whatever, but that they would be a competent team that would have an exciting future. And now they have the first overall pick, except they don't, because they traded it away to Chicago in order to get the first overall pick last year, who ended up being Bryce Young, who out of the 4 quarterbacks that were taken has been awful. And most people could see it coming because he's 5'9". Trying to play quarterback in the NFL as a 5'9" human being is not a good idea.
Yeah. He's legitimately bad, and it all starts with David Tepper. That's where I am with the Panthers. I don't care what they do. The second Daniel Snyder left the NFL or got ousted in the NFL, then we had to find who's the next worst owner, and it is David Tepper. He is the worst owner.
Clearly David Tepper. And
who's the second worst? Like, who's the second worst? I don't even know who's close.
Jimmy Haslam, Browns owner.
Oh,
has to be him.
Haslam's up there. Yeah. Fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
That being said, though, like they can bring in Dave Canales, they can do whatever they want as long as David Tepper's the owner. That franchise is going nowhere. And the rumors are that David Tepper was the one that said, I want Bryce Young. And other people in that franchise were like, we want CJ Stroud. And they're like, he's like, no, this is my team. I own this team. We're going to draft Bryce Young. And then lo and behold, dude, Bryce Young's bad, man. Like he's legitimately bad. I don't think there's any saving that. And the fact that now they essentially traded the first overall pick this year when you have Caleb Williams and Drake May and JJ McCarthy and Jaden Daniels, all these people, like the Panthers just set their franchise back forever. They have 6 draft picks this year. That's all. 6. Yeah. Like they're not going to be better this year. They're probably going to be worse. And so as long as David Tepper's there, the Panthers are the worst team in the NFL.
So first of all, I think it would be very hard to be worse than what they were last year. I think it's possible, and if there's a team that can do it, it would be them, because that roster is not good. And like, so like, I like Dave Canales. I liked what he did in Seattle with Pete Carroll. I like that he spent a ton of time with Pete Carroll. That to me is like a good person to learn how to be a head coach under, right? And then he goes to Tampa Bay, and in his first opportunity as a play caller, as a coordinator, as somebody who's in charge of that side of the ball, took a journeyman who, like, his Baker Mayfield's career was lost. And then he goes to Tampa with Dave Canales, and he finds enough where, look, whatever you thought of the Eagles at the end of the year, they still beat the Eagles in the playoffs. And they came pretty darn close to beating the Lions, too, in the divisional round in Detroit. And, like, there are some things that Canales does that's really, really good. And when you listen to him talk, when you see him in interviews, he's a very personable person. He's a very nice guy, just has a very easy way of getting people to listen to him and take him in. But man, there's no hope with this franchise right now. Dude, you spent a boatload of capital to get a size outlier at quarterback, and not even like a little size outlier, right? Like we're not talking about Kyler Murray, who, like, yes, is shorter and all that, but Kyler Murray was also very special as a runner and had elite level arm talent, right? Like those were the things that you bet on with Kyler. Whereas with Bryce Young, it's like this is a traditional drop back passer who is very smart and could do a lot of things from that angle. But he's 5'9", and so all the stuff that you can do as a traditional passer are kind of nullified by that. I mean, not everything, but like a lot of it is. And it's unfortunate that they gave up so much for a size outlier. It just doesn't make any sense. And so you can bring in Dave Canales, and maybe he'll get more out of Bryce Young than what they did last year. I think that's possible. And Bryce Young was not put in a good situation because their receivers were trash last year. But regardless of that, you're in a bad spot, and Dave Tepper looks like he's going to continue to dig his own grave, which is funny because there's still, as far as I know, no digging being done in the Carolinas for a new facility, even though he promised that was going to get done by now. But, I guess you're busy throwing drinks at random fans in the stands. So, good for them. Canales did bring in quite a few of the coaches that were with him in Tampa, including longtime assistant head coach Harold Goodwin, who was with Bruce Arians in Arizona, was with Bruce Arians in Tampa, stayed with Todd Bowles in Tampa when Bruce Arians got shoved out. So that's, I think, a good part of this. Azure Rivero, who a lot of people respect, I think is also a very good defensive coordinator. Him and his staff are largely intact and will stay in Carolina. So there's like the objective part of me is like, these are all to me like interesting, good things that are happening, but they also don't matter because you have Bryce Young as your quarterback and Dave Tepper as your owner, and you're kind of just put in a corner, and it's going to be real hard to deal with that.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Bucks. Dave Canales now out as offensive coordinator. Liam Cohen, who was at the University of Kentucky, is now in as offensive coordinator. I don't know anything about Liam Cohen. I'll be perfectly honest. I have no idea what kind of offense he runs. I have no idea if Baker Mayfield is going to be working in this offense. Who knows? So I'm not going to pretend to know anything about that. And we've got plenty of other things to talk about that don't involve the Bucks. A bunch of assistants, like we just said, are joining Canales in Carolina. We're going to move on to probably my favorite hire of this cycle. And it's one that I talked about before he got hired, somebody that I've gone to bat for the last couple of coaching cycles, and that is Raheem Morris with the Atlanta Falcons. Raheem Morris is a very good football coach, and it was astounding to see the contrast between Falcons fans, and basically every other respectable person in the NFL and in NFL media when Raheem Morris got hired. Falcons fans thought this was a disaster and that they were going to like lose their franchise because Raheem Morris got hired. Everyone else, coaches, execs, owners, etc., they all thought this was a slam dunk, home run, like perfect hire for them. And I tend to agree with them because I like Raheem Morris. I think he got the short end of the stick when he was in Tampa, got hired very, very young, probably too young for his first head coaching job, still managed to win 10 games in his second year and basically told management and ownership, like, hey, the way we won games was kind of an anomaly. We're probably not going to be able to do that with this exact same team. We need to be able to really upgrade this team. And they basically said, nah, we're not going to do that. You won 10 games last year. You could do it again this year. And then they didn't. Shocker. So he bounces around the league. He goes to Washington, develops some relationships with that Shanahan tree, goes to Atlanta with Dan Quinn, becomes their wide receivers coach, interestingly enough, even though he had a background in defense and with defensive backs, eventually became their defensive coordinator and then their like interim head coach. There was a point where like Dan Quinn, Marquand Manuel, and Raheem Morris were kind of like splitting defensive play calling duties where like one guy was calling first down, another guy was calling second down, another guy was calling third down. Weirdly enough, that was like when their defense was performing best that season. I don't know. Again, that's something I saw on Twitter. I don't know how real that actually is, but I still think that's funny, and I'm going to pretend that it's real for now. So Raheem Morris is in his head. He was the interim head coach after Dan Quinn got fired. I thought they did a great job with him when he was the interim. They almost beat the Chiefs in Kansas City. Were it not for an unfortunately dropped AJ Terrell interception, they probably would have won that game. He goes to the Rams after Brandon Staley leaves. He becomes their defensive coordinator. He's basically given Brandon Staley's playbook and said, hey, Brandon Staley was great last year. We love what he did. You go make this work with his playbook. And he did. And they won the Super Bowl by doing that. And then the next couple of years, he starts to integrate more of his style of defense more. And despite being super, super young and not having a ton of talent on that side of the ball, they still performed probably above expectations. I mean, they weren't like a train wreck, that's for sure, right? I mean, there were some games where that defense played well. There were some games where they weren't, but regardless of that, everyone that's been around Raheem Morris loved Raheem Morris, and they think very highly of Raheem Morris. And I think that's very obvious by the fact that he was able to bring in a hot, young offensive mind in Zach Robinson to be his offensive coordinator and Jimmy Lake as his defensive coordinator. This is I really do think this is the best hire of this cycle. I love Raheem Morris. I think that he has a very, very good, potentially even easy shot at winning this division by quite a bit. If they get a quarterback, whoever that is, they're winning this division by 2 or 3 games, and it's not even close.
Yeah, after what he did with the Rams defense this past year, that Rams defense has no talent on it. I mean, yeah, it has the defensive tackle. They have the 2 defensive
Aaron
tackles,
Donald.
right? Aaron Donald. Jeez, my God, I couldn't remember Aaron Donald's name. Thank you. They have, and then they also have that rookie that's really good too. Can't remember his name right now either. But outside of those 2 players, there's really no one on that defense that's worth writing home about. And they played very well this year, to a point that they made the playoffs. And you go into the playoffs, right? They made the playoffs. Am I messing that up? Okay.
No.
Jeez, my brain is broken right now. Okay, so he earns this Falcons job. But like you said, this is the thing with, and it might not work this year. Maybe it's going to take 2 years. They need a quarterback. Like literally, it can't be Desmond Ridder. As long as it's not Desmond Ridder, I'm with you. Like, go get Baker Mayfield. Do that. You'll win the division if you have Baker Mayfield. You're not winning the division if you have Desmond Ridder. So
honestly, you could bring in Kirk Cousins, even though he's coming off an Achilles injury. Like, I understand Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury. I think Kirk Cousins on 1 ankle is better than Desmond Ridder on 2 at this point.
100%.
I can't keep watching this Falcons team waste top 10 skill position talent.
Dude, talent. The names on that offense are too good to. It makes no sense. So yeah, I think Raheem Morris has an opportunity to, like you said, run away with that division as long as they can find competent quarterback play. That team does have talent on it, and they have a plethora of draft picks and a top 10 pick where they can kind of retool a little bit, but they got to solve that quarterback position.
100%. And their defense was good last year, and even though they didn't get to keep Ryan Nielsen, he went to Jacksonville. I think that Jimmy Lake is, like, as far as I know, which isn't very much, admittedly, like, he's somebody that was a head coach in college, kind of got fired for non-football reasons, let's call it. People can look that up if they want. But for the most part, this is somebody who, like, got this job for a reason. I think that he will probably continue the success that they have. I mentioned this on the salary cap extravaganza that this is probably a spot for Leonard Floyd, right? Because of his relationship with Raheem Morris. They played together in Los Angeles with the Rams. The Falcons really need another edge rusher. It wouldn't surprise me if this is where Leonard Floyd ends up going if he doesn't resign with the Bills, which at this point seems unlikely. Again, go watch the salary cap show. It's great. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, who for some reason kept Dennis Allen as their head coach. I don't get it, man. Dennis Allen is a very good defensive coordinator. There's nothing in any of the years he's been a head coach that has shown me that he's going to be good for your franchise. I will never understand Dennis Allen being a head coach. They fire their offensive coordinator, Pete Carmichael. They hire Clint Kubiak, who was the passing coordinator for the Niners. He used to be on the Vikings. Again, one of these Shanahan tree guys. Longtime coach Doug Marrone also fired from them. Bills fans might recognize him. Ronald Curry, their quarterbacks coach, went to Buffalo. We already talked about him. Other assistants, Kevin Carberry, Cody Burns, Joel Thomas, all fired. I don't get this team. They're another 7-8 win team in 2024. I don't get what they're trying to do. I will never understand what the Saints are trying to do. They are, as usual, the team with the most negative cap space, with over $80 million in cap space, which is $30 million more than the next two teams, which are the Dolphins and the Bills. They keep borrowing on their credit cards, and they just keep thinking, we'll just next year we'll pay these all off. We'll be really good. We'll be good. As long as we win this year. They don't win. They don't win enough games to be spending this kind of money. It doesn't make any sense.
As somebody that's been on the Saints bandwagon for 2 years, during the offseason, this team's got to win the division. They're going to go to the playoffs. My literal worst take, and it wasn't the Steelers take. I actually was kind of close with the Steelers take, so I'm not going to take too much flack for that.
You were closer with the Steelers take than you ever should have been. We'll put it that way.
Okay. My Saints take was bad. I had them as the number 1 seed in the NFC. I didn't let me be clear. Let me be very clear. It wasn't because I believed that they were remotely close to the number 1 team in the NFC. I don't think I had them as a top 4 team in the NFC. I just had them as the 1 seed because their schedule's a joke. It was an absolute joke going into the season. And the fact that team went 9-8 is the biggest embarrassment that if the Bills went 9-8 with that schedule, I'd call for Sean McDermott's head, Brandon Beane to be fired, and I want to trade Josh Allen. That's what I want to do if the Bills played that schedule and went 9-8. Dennis Allen's a coach still. I don't understand. I really don't get it. That team's a disaster. And like you said, they just keep borrowing on the credit card. So here within the next 2 years, all the people that say, "Oh, the cap's not real, just watch the Saints. Yeah. They're going to be bottom feeders for a long time because they have no money.
Yeah. They'll go from mid feeders to bottom feeders. Cool. Good for you guys. Moving on to the Niners. We just talked about Clint Kubiak going to the Saints. That's, as far as I know, the biggest. Oh wait, no. Steve Wilkes got fired. Totally forgot about that. Steve Wilkes, scapegoat in the NFC West yet again. Man, what a shame. Steve Wilkes, I feel bad for him. He's been on the short end of the stick way too often in his career in the last couple of years. I think he's a good coach. I think he has some flaws, probably a little bit abrasive, but honestly, you could probably say the same about Kyle Shanahan, and nobody wants to fire him. And it's just very weird to me that he got fired after the Super Bowl, especially a Super Bowl where they played very well. There were some rumors that Kyle Shanahan was taking over play calling for Steve Wilkes during that game at times, which is very weird. And if that's the case, then Kyle Shanahan really is a genius because that's one of the best games the Niners played on defense all year. And that's just really funny to think about. I don't know how true that actually is, but I think regardless, it's just weird that, again, they probably did to Steve Wilkes what the Rams did with Raheem Morris, right? Where they bring in Steve Wilkes and said, "Hey, here's D'Amico Ryan's playbook. We really love what he did. Can you do that?" And he basically did. And it wasn't as good as D'Amico Ryan's. Yeah, D'Amico Ryan's a very special coach. But it was still good. It's not like they were a bad defense. They had some struggles at times, but they weren't bad. It's just a very bizarre move. And as far as I know, they haven't hired a new defensive coordinator at this point. Oh God, the first thing that came up was Bill Belichick. die laughing if they hired Bill Belichick. That would be incredible. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this whole very odd, strange situation, but yeah.
I don't get the firing of Steve Wilkes after that. I thought the defense played very well, all things considered. I mean, they were without Talone Noah Hufanga, who's a phenomenal safety, who they lost earlier in the year. I think they lost him in like week 11. And then
Yeah.
Dre Greenlaw tears his Achilles just going onto the field, and they had to pivot, and suddenly they pivoted, and they did a great job against the Chiefs offense for the most part. That being said, the biggest issue in that Super Bowl, or the biggest coaching blunder in the Super Bowl, is that the head coach of the 49ers apparently didn't tell his players the rules of the game. So if anything, Kyle Shanahan is the one that should in a theory have been on the chopping block. I'm not saying he should have been fired, but the fact that they did scapegoat Steve Wilkes and they're suddenly pretending like that's the reason they lost the Super Bowl, that's not why. The offense underperformed that game, and the defense, despite having some injuries and the stupid trade they made for Chase Young, who's just not a very good football player at this point in his career, post injuries and effort issues, etc. Like, I thought Steve Wilkes did a fine job. The ball also didn't just bounce the 49ers way. There were 7 fumbles, 6 of them recovered by the Chiefs. That doesn't happen ever. When there's 7 fumbles, you don't recover 6 of them. That is statistically improbable. And lo and behold, the Chiefs did. And that also played a major role into why the 49ers lost. Not Steve Wilkes.
If the ball does not bounce off that guy's ankle and Ray McLeod tries his best to try and recover that muffed punt, because the Chiefs scored on the very next play after they recovered that. I mean,
so
that's Chiefs, probably the biggest flexion point in that game. And for some reason, Steve Wilkes it doesn't have a job because of that, probably.
You think outside of that, like, take that play out of the game, which I know these are ifs, ands, and buts.
Yes.
Take that play out of the game probably doesn't go to overtime. The Chiefs scored 12 points.
Yeah, probably.
I don't understand how we put that on a defensive coordinator. Like, that's a phenomenal game, but
it's bizarre. I don't really get it, and I feel bad for Steve Wilkes. I don't know where he'll end up, but he's got to. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he just takes a year off, given all the kind of garbage he's had to deal with the last couple of years. Moving on to the Rams. The Rams have had a lot of their staff get poached to go to Atlanta. It's with Raheem Morris. Zach Robinson, who was their quarterbacks coach, is now gone. I think their passing game coordinator, whoever that was, is now gone. Jimmy Lake, who was their assistant head coach, is now the defensive coordinator in Atlanta. Chris Shula, one of the Shula children, is now the defensive coordinator with the Rams. Sean McVay, I felt like last year was a really great sort of referendum on Sean McVay as a head coach. The year after they won the Super Bowl was really tough, and you could tell it really weighed on him to lose that much because he's not lost ever as a head coach like that before. Like, he had a winning record every year as a head coach before 2022. He clearly struggled. And there were rumors that he was just going to leave coaching and go into the analyst booth at Amazon. They were offering him big money to do that. And he came back. No one really knew what Stafford was going to be like. No one knew if Cooper Kupp was really going to be the same again. This offensive line didn't look amazing. The defense did not have a ton of talent, and Sean McVay made it work. Part of it helps when you have a 5th-round pick turn into one of the best receivers in the NFL.
Jeez, yeah.
But Sean McVay is part of that, right? Like, you can't just say, like, oh, Puka would have done that anywhere. Like, no. Like, Puka would not have done that anywhere because not everyone would have just slowly brought him along. Like, this is what's funny is that, like, Puka was clearly talented. Injuries and a limited route tree are kind of what pushed him down in the draft. But, like, the Rams just sort of brought him along, like, okay, you're going to run these routes to start off, right? And he did it well. And he caught basically every pass that was thrown his way, it seemed like. And then he just continued to grow. He continued to work in that offense. He developed chemistry with Stafford, like, right off the bat. So, yeah, I mean, McVay really did a phenomenal job as a coach. It's not surprising that his staff now is starting to get depleted because of that. Unfortunately, the success comes with getting poached, and it's tough. But McVay is somebody who's obviously very well respected in the NFL. He'll put that staff back together, and it's time to start thinking about the future. Probably a future without Stafford for the Rams. Even though Stafford had a great year last year, he was playing great football last year. Just some really great games from Stafford. Especially at his age and dealing with the injuries that he dealt with the last couple of years, like very, very impressive from him as well. But you're now starting to reset things from a draft perspective, right? They're getting their picks back now. They're starting to normalize things, right? Like they're no longer in that sort of push all the chips to the middle of the table mode, right? Like at a certain point, they said, once they lost like 10 plus games in 2022, they basically said, all right, we gotta move on past this. We gotta hit a hard reset and just like go as deep as we can. And that first draft last year for 2023 hit very well for them. They got some really, really good players. They've been able to develop players, which is a good sign of a good coach. So the Rams are an interesting team. It'll be interesting to see where they go with quarterback in 2024. Really, probably closer to 2025 is when they will probably start looking at quarterbacks. But just very, very interesting team, and it'll be tough in that division. But it'll be fun to watch this team.
Yeah, on the same way that I look at the Panthers and I say they have, as long as they have David Tepper as their owner, I'm not going to believe in them. As long as the Rams have Sean McVay as their head coach, I will believe in them just because he's such a good head coach. And this year, I think, was his best year as a coach. Better coaching year than the Super Bowl year because all the talent they had that Super Bowl year, you should have the ability to go and win 10 plus games and maybe make a run to the Super Bowl, which they did. And massive kudos to him. This year, they just didn't have the talent or the presumed talent, and they still won. Also, just really interesting to me, I had mentioned earlier that Mike Zimmer started his career at 38 years old in 1994. Sean McVay is 38.
Correct. Yeah, for those who don't know, Sean McVay was hired to be a head coach when he was 31 years old.
Yeah,
and
I'm older than that now.
Listen, I don't like it either. Man. And at the time, I was still in college. I didn't really think anything of it. I mean, I knew that was very, very young, but I didn't really think much of it. And then, like, it wasn't until later, like, after he'd been there for a couple of years, I was like, how old is Sean McVay? He's got to be in his 40s now, right? And it's like, no, he's like 35. I'm like, oh my God. And then, like, I remember they interviewed him at some point and somebody asked him about that. And he was like, I look back now and I think, why did they hire me? Like, how did they do that? Like, I don't know why they did this. But it worked out for them. I think this gets thrown around a lot. We're like, oh, this team lucked into this, but like, the Rams kind of lucked into Sean McVay being who Sean McVay is to an extent. Like, how many times has the young hotshot guy just not worked out? And especially at that age, 31 years old, that's crazy to think about. But you go through the interview process for a reason, and they clearly saw what they saw, right? Like just somebody who has a great personality, somebody who's a good leader, somebody who is very, very smart from a football perspective, very organized, very detailed. And that all translated, right? That all worked for them. And he has his flaws. He's not the best game manager in the world, but man, he does so many good things for that team. And the Rams are very fortunate to have him as a head coach. Moving on to the Arizona Cardinals, where no major changes happened, at least from what I saw. So we're moving on to the Seattle Seahawks and our final team here. All right. So Pete Carroll is out. He was the oldest coach in the NFL. He's now out. He is in some sort of vague front office position now. Clearly, he still wanted to keep coaching, but they said no. They now hire Mike Macdonald to be their head coach, who was the Ravens defensive coordinator for the last couple of years. He's been phenomenal as the Ravens defensive coordinator. I think the big thing that made me feel very, very confident in Mike Macdonald as a coach is you look at guys who have been on this team and they all have had like career years with Mike Macdonald. Guys like Roquan Smith, Roquan Smith was good in Chicago. He took a step forward when he went to Baltimore and got traded there with Mike Macdonald. Justin Madubuike, who was like, he's okay, was like a high-rated recruit coming out of high school, went to Texas A&M, didn't do much in his first couple years in the NFL, 13 sacks this year. Just craziness. Jadeveon Clowney, who has had good seasons, had a really good season with the Ravens this year. Kyle Hamilton took a big step this year in his second year as safety. Geno Stone. Who the heck knew who Geno Stone was before this year? And then he's leading the league in interceptions. And this was not a team that was, completely healthy the entire time. They were ultimately pretty healthy, if not entirely healthy, for the AFC Championship against the Chiefs, where in the second half they completely shut down the Chiefs. And they got in the first half. I think we all saw that, but second half they shut down the Chiefs. That was not the reason why they lost that game. And then for the rest of the season, I mean, my gosh, this defense was just lights out. And the big thing was when they went against good teams, like legitimately good teams, those big matchups that they had to win, they cooked teams. Whether it was the Niners on Monday night on Christmas Day, whether it was the Lions when they were in Baltimore, right? They obliterated the Lions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like this is the type of coach that you're getting. Everyone that has been around Mike Macdonald seems to love Mike Macdonald. And he has brought in some very interesting hires just to start things off. Leslie Frazier as his assistant head coach, love that. He apparently has a very good relationship with Leslie Frazier. He's been a mentor for Mike Macdonald. I think that's just a very, very good hire and a good place for Leslie Frazier to be, honestly. Jay Harbaugh, who he knew from his time at the University of Michigan, is Jim Harbaugh's son. Is it going to be their special teams coordinator, Ryan Grubb, who was the offensive coordinator for the Washington Huskies, who were just in the national championship, ironically, against the University of Michigan, and Jim Harbaugh's team is going to be their offensive coordinator here. And Aiden Durd, who was the Dallas defensive line coach for the last couple of seasons, is going to be their defensive coordinator. Very interesting hires. I really like Mike Macdonald. He seems just like in the same vein as Raheem Morris, right? Where it's like everyone that talks about this guy thinks very highly of this guy.
Yeah.
That there's not a bad thing that's said about him as a person. There's not a bad thing that's said about him as a coach. Guys, players, coaches, owners, etc. Everybody just speaks very, very highly of him. In a lot of ways, this almost seems like they hired a younger Pete Carroll. And if that's the case, then good for them.
Yeah, from Mike Macdonald, just starting with his year with the Ravens this year, the one thing that would have me really excited if I was a Seahawks fan of what he did with that defense, it's not what the defense did overall, let's say. I mean, it is, but I look at is I'm like, where did he elevate players? Well, he elevated players at every single level. And that is super important because now it doesn't matter who you bring into Seattle. I trust that he has the ability to elevate linebackers, elevate defensive linemen, elevate safeties, elevate corner. Like if you have a guy that you can trust to elevate every position at your head coach, like you're set, you're going to be good. And then you brought up the Leslie Frazier thing. I think that's massive. I think probably I'm going to guess a lot of Seahawks fans are like, oh, okay, Leslie Frazier, like that's fine. Like he's an assistant. That's okay. You have a guy that's a first-time head coach. He's only 36 years old, so he's very, very young. To have that person there that's been there, done that, been a head coach in the NFL, been with multiple teams, knows how these things work, to be able to say to him, like, what do I do right now? Or how do I handle this situation? How can I improve? I think that relationship between Mike Macdonald and Leslie Frazier is going to be massive. The Seahawks, I think, got the right guy here, and a guy who a few years from now we're going to be like, yeah, they made the right move moving on from Pete Carroll, who's been great for the Seahawks. But they got younger at the head coach, and they got a guy that, by all accounts, has just been a stud with the Ravens this past decade that he's been there.
Yeah, I think that this was a really phenomenal hire for them. They kind of sort of lucked into it with Mike Macdonald not being in the Super Bowl. but yeah, I think this is a great hire. This is just going to be a really good time for them to reset things. They have 2 more years, I think, on Geno Smith's contract, and he's playing well enough where it's like you feel comfortable with that, and you don't feel like you have to press on a quarterback right now in order to kind of like do something, you know. So I think this is going to be a really good way to transition out of the Pete Carroll era. It is interesting that John Schneider is still the general manager there. Obviously, him and Pete Carroll had a very strong working relationship during their time there because they basically came in at the same time and developed a whole different style of defense and developed how to draft guys for that defense and really just draft in a totally different way than everybody else. Seattle often zigged when everyone else was zagging, right? Like in the draft, that was always their thing. There were times where they made the sort of sensible or consensus pick on things. Like when they took Charles Cross and then DK Metcalf, like those types of players, right? But I still remember the Bruce Irvins and the James Carpenters of Seattle draft past. So we'll see how much of that was Pete Carroll's influence, how much of that was John Schneider's influence. It'd be interesting to see what goes on there. That's gonna be it. Look at that, under 2 hours, craziness. Really thought this was gonna be longer. I'm glad we were able to keep this shorter.
Did all 32 teams.
We did all 32 teams. We will be back next week. It will be another pre-recorded show, unfortunately. At some point, like I said, we will get back to live shows. This is just a matter of scheduling. Unfortunately, having an actual job takes me away from things that I'd like to do. But regardless, we will be back next week with another recorded show. Thank you all for joining us. If you have not done so already, hit that like button below, leave a comment, share this with your friends, enemies, lovers, neighbors, etc. Consider subscribing to One Pass. This is the most direct way to support us here at Cover One and all the work that we do, whether it's members only content, scouting reports, the salary cap breakdown that Greg does. He does this great salary cap show that I was a part of. Go check that out. Again, that's I think the 5th time I've said that on the show. But it's great. But he also has a series on YouTube that's available to One Pass people that tells you everything about the salary cap, how it works, how it functions. Like, it's great. Like, that alone might be worth $60. You also get access to the Slack community. It's a great group of people who talk about the Bills on game day and all throughout the season and the off season. And they talk about other stuff too. So it's a great group. You also get a nice t-shirt and a decal, and who doesn't love that? So consider subscribing to Cover One Pass. It's just a great way to support us. It's the best way to support us. We really appreciate all of our One Pass subscribers. If you're here on YouTube or on any other podcast platform, go check out the other shows that we have. You've got Under Review with Joe DeRosa on Tuesday nights. You've got Disguised Coverage as well on Tuesday nights. You've got with Anthony Prohaska. You've got the Flagship Show. You've got the Film Room. You've got Buffalo Late Night with Thomas DeLaus. You've got the Draft Show now with John and Daniel over on the Cover One College Football channel. If you are not subscribed to that channel, do that right now as well. They're doing a great job over there. Marlon has his show about college football over there as well. The Cover One Fantasy with Chris Hughes. He's doing a great job there. Again, separate channel. Go subscribe to him. He's great. Listen, it's a lot of really bad fantasy analysts out there. Chris Hughes is not one of those guys. He is very good, and he does a ton of work. I swear, I retweet like at least 2 things that he puts out every day. That dude puts in so much freaking work.
Wild.
Yeah. He does a great job. So look through this channel, look through our other channels, you'll find content that you want. I guarantee you, there's going to be something for you. If the Walls Could Talk, another great show, very different from just about every other show that's on here. Just like a great pair of guys that are talking about, they give you a real inside look into how the NFL works and how NFL franchises run. Just we got you covered here, is what I'm saying. We got you covered here at Cover One. So, with that said, Uber, where can the people find you?
At UberHansen on Twitter. I'm working on some pieces of content. I don't know when they're going to be ready. They're all draft related. But at some point I'll be tweeting out something about draft trades and then another one about draft value. Something that I kind of do a little bit of every single year.
Excellent. Sorry, very ill-timed yawn. You can find me at DFAUXY or at DFoxy. That is going to be it for us. Thank you all for tuning in. Bye-bye.